My mother-in-law stood at the end of the dining table, pointed at my 2-year-old daughter and said, "Take her and leave my house." It was Christmas afternoon. Every person in that room heard it. Not a single one moved. I didn't argue. I picked up my daughter, grabbed her bag, and walked out into the December cold, believing I would never bring her back. I could not have imagined that less than an hour later, something small and clay-colored, sitting at the bottom of a forgotten tote bag, would make my mother-in-law cry harder than she had at the funeral. What happened in that house after I left changed every one of them. Stay with me until the end. My name is Lydia. I'm 32 years old, and 10 months before that Christmas, I lost my husband Aaron on a February morning when his car hit black ice outside Brockville and went through the guardrail on the 401. He was 34. He was on his way home from a weekend with his brother when it happened. I found out while I was still in bed trying to get our daughter down for a nap, and by the time I understood what the officer was telling me on the phone, I was sitting on the kitchen floor, and she was patting my knee with her small hand, like she already knew something had broken. Her name is Bia. She was 18 months old at the time, with Aaron's exact dark eyes and his habit of tilting her head to the left when she was thinking hard about something. Every time she did it, I had to remind myself to breathe. I wanted her to know her father's family. That mattered to me, even when it was difficult. His mother, his brother, his aunts, they were part of Aaron, and I couldn't take that from my daughter even if I had wanted to. So I kept calling. I kept showing up for holidays and birthdays and school photos I mailed out to everyone on Aaron's contact list. I kept trying, even when his mother made it very clear that she didn't want me to. She had never been entirely warm to me, not even before. Aaron used to joke that she needed 3 Christmases before she fully accepted anyone, and since we'd only had 2 before he died, I had technically not yet made the cut. After he was gone, whatever tolerance she had managed was replaced by something colder. She didn't shout at me in those first months. She was simply unreachable. She looked through me at family gatherings. She spoke to Bia as though I wasn't standing right there holding her. When she did address me directly, it was usually to tell me something I was doing wrong. The Christmas invitation was technically extended by Aaron's brother and his wife, who genuinely wanted us there. So I said yes. I packed the car and drove 4 hours from Ottawa on the 401, with Bia strapped into her car seat, singing the same 3 words of Jingle Bells on repeat because it was the only part she knew. I had wrapped the gifts until midnight and spent the morning making a butter tart loaf because Aaron's family had always loved it at the holidays. I told myself that if I kept showing up, kept being patient, something would eventually soften. I believed that. I really did. We arrived at the family house in Barrie just after noon. Snow had been falling all morning, and the driveway was soft with it. The house was decorated the way it always had been. The wreath on the door, the string of white lights along the roof, the big spruce tree visible through the front window. It looked like a Christmas card, the kind that makes you ache a little for things you can't name. I carried Bia on my hip and balanced the tote bag of gifts with my other arm. Tucked between the wrapped presents, at the very bottom of the bag, was something I had been looking forward to giving all week. Bia's daycare runs a holiday craft morning every December. This year, the children pressed their hands into air-dry clay, and the teachers fired the pieces in the center's small kiln and painted them white with a dusting of gold glitter around the edges. Each child's name was pressed into the back. On Bia's, beneath her name, I had added in my own handwriting, "Merry Christmas, Grandma, I love you." It wasn't perfect. Her fingers had shifted slightly before the clay dried, so the pinky sat at a small angle, and there was a smudge near the wrist where she had pulled back too fast. I loved it more for that. There would never be another ornament like this one. Another impression of her 2-year-old hand, caught still for a moment on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I had wrapped it in tissue paper and tied it with gold ribbon. I spent more time on that than on anything else in the bag. Aaron's brother met us at the door and hugged Bia until she giggled, and for a moment the house felt like somewhere safe. Then my mother-in-law appeared in the hallway. She looked at me, looked at the tote bag, and said the chicken I had offered to bring last week would not have been necessary since she had already planned the entire menu. I said it was a butter tart loaf, not chicken. She didn't respond. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I told myself it was fine. The afternoon passed the way those afternoons do, in careful conversation and careful silences. Aaron's aunt was kind to me. His brother's wife made a point of sitting near me and keeping the conversation moving. His mother moved through the rooms like someone managing a headache. Every so often she made a remark that landed just wrong enough to sting, then moved on before anyone had to respond to it. She said my haircut didn't suit me. She said Bia seemed overtired and perhaps the drive had been too long for a child that age. She mentioned while we were setting the table that Aaron had once told her I was bad at accepting help, and that she'd always found that a difficult quality in a person. I kept arranging the napkins. I kept my face still. What hurt was not only what she said. It was that nobody answered her. Aaron's brother looked at the floor. His wife suddenly needed something from the kitchen. The aunt appeared busy with something in her bag. I stood among people who had watched Aaron grow up, people he had loved, and I felt completely invisible in the middle of all of them. Dinner was ready by 3 o'clock. The table was full, the food was good, and for a little while the conversation stayed light enough that I could breathe. Bia sat in the portable high chair I had brought and ate small pieces of turkey off the tray and periodically offered them to me with great seriousness. Aaron's uncle smiled at her from across the table. "She's got his stubborn little chin," he said warmly. "Exactly the same." I felt a pull in my chest that was equal parts grief and gratitude. She did have it. She had so much of him in her. I watched my mother-in-law's expression change as he said it. Something moved across her face that I recognized. I had seen it on my own face in the mirror enough times. It was the look of someone ambushed by grief in the middle of an ordinary moment. I understood that. Even then, I wanted to reach across the table and tell her I knew exactly what that felt like. But she wasn't looking at me with grief. She was looking at me with something else. "You bring her here," she said. Her voice was low at first, the way a storm sounds before it decides what it is. "Every time. You bring her and everyone talks about Aaron as though you want us to keep feeling it." I set down my fork. "I bring her because she's his daughter," I said quietly, "and because she should know her family." "You keep her in front of us," she said louder now. "You've been doing it since March. Sending photos, calling on his birthday, showing up at Easter. You think I don't see what you're doing?" The room had gone completely still. Even Bia had stopped moving on her tray. "I'm trying to keep him present for her," I said. She pushed back her chair. The sound of it scraping across the hardwood floor cut through the silence. "You don't belong in this house," she said. "You never fit here. He deserved more than what you gave him, and everyone around this table knows it. So take your daughter and go. Get out of my house, today, now." Bia startled at the sound of the chair and began to whimper. I picked her up immediately and pressed her against my chest, one hand on the back of her small head. I looked around the table. Aaron's uncle was staring at his plate. His brother's wife had her hand over her mouth. His brother was looking at the window, jaw tight, not meeting anyone's eyes. Nobody spoke. I stood up slowly. I had 1,000 things I could have said. I knew exactly which words would have landed the hardest, and I chose none of them. "Thank you for having us," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected it to be. I lifted Bia higher on my hip, picked up her diaper bag from beside my chair, and walked out of the dining room. I did not take the tote bag. I did not take the butter tart loaf from the kitchen counter. I did not take the wrapped gifts still beneath the tree, or the ornament I had been thinking about all week. I buckled Ba into her car seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway before I let myself feel any of it. The highway back toward Ottawa was almost empty. Most people were home. Most people were exactly where they were supposed to be, and I was driving through the dark in December with a toddler who had fallen asleep before we reached the edge of Barrie, her mouth slightly open, one mitten still on and one lost somewhere on the back seat. The snow had slowed, but the sky sat heavy and gray with more of it waiting. I had the radio on low. I don't remember what was playing. I remember thinking about the ornament. I remembered pressing Bee's hand into the clay at the kitchen table 2 weeks earlier, laughing when she pulled back too fast and smeared the edge. I remembered blowing on it gently to help it dry. I remembered the way she had looked at the finished piece with enormous satisfaction, completely unaware that her mother was tearing up behind her. I thought about turning around. I slowed down once, just for a moment. Then I thought about what I would be returning to, and I kept driving. Whatever came next, whatever Bia offered this woman in the future, it would have to be on different terms. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because my daughter deserved to give her love to people who were ready to receive it. She was 2 years old. She had already lost her father. She did not need to be carried into rooms where she was used as evidence in an argument she had nothing to do with. I reached for the radio and turned it off. The car was very quiet. In the rearview mirror, Bea slept with her chin tucked down toward her chest. "You don't have to earn anyone's love," I whispered to her. "Not ever, not once." It was the truest thing I knew. Back at the house in Barry, the dinner sat unfinished. No one had moved the plates. Someone had turned the Christmas music off, and without it the house felt like a different place entirely, larger somehow, and much colder. It was Aaron's uncle who noticed the tote bag first. I must have set it down near the front hallway when we arrived and never moved it. He carried it to the side table near the tree and looked through it to see if there was anything perishable. At the very bottom, beneath the wrapped gifts, he found something small wrapped in gold ribbon tissue paper with no name on the outside. He turned it over in his hands, uncertain. Then he brought it across the room and placed it in front of my mother-in-law, who had not moved from her chair at the head of the table. "I think this might be from Bea," he said quietly. She looked at the small package for a long time without opening it. She sat with it in her hands the way people sit with things they are not sure they deserve. Then she peeled back the tissue paper slowly, and the ornament slid out into her palm. It was small, no bigger than a coaster, white clay with a shimmer of gold glitter around the edges. In the center, pressed clearly into the surface, was the impression of a child's open hand. Small enough that all 5 fingers fit easily across the disc. The smudge near the wrist was still there, exactly as it had dried. She turned it over. "Merry Christmas, Grandma. I love you." Nobody at the table made a sound. She stared at the handprint for a very long time, then she pressed the ornament flat against her chest, the way someone holds something they are afraid of dropping. Her breath came in one long, jagged exhale. And then she began to cry, not the controlled kind, not the quiet kind she had permitted herself at Aaron's funeral, with her hands folded in her lap, but the kind that comes from somewhere deep and untended, the kind that has been waiting for permission for a very long time. "I sent her away," she said quietly, "to no one in particular, to all of them. I sent her and the baby away." No one contradicted her. It was Aaron's uncle who spoke first. He said Aaron had told him once, not long before the accident, that his one real fear had nothing to do with his job or his health or his mortgage. He said Aaron was afraid that if anything ever happened to him, the people he loved would stop taking care of each other. He had said it with the ease of someone who didn't think it would ever be necessary information. Aaron's brother set down the dish he was holding. "I should have said something today," he said. "I should have said something a long time before today. Every time she came, I kept thinking it wasn't my place." He stopped. "That's not a reason, it's just what I told myself, so I didn't have to do it." His wife was crying quietly. "She was so careful with all of us," she said. "She never came empty-handed. She asked about everyone's children, everyone's plans. She sent photos every month. And we sat there and watched it happen, visit after visit, and we told ourselves it wasn't our business." She shook her head. "We made it her problem to survive alone." Aaron's aunt admitted she had almost said something at Easter. Almost. She had opened her mouth and then thought about the drive home and the argument it might cause, and she had closed it again and poured herself more wine instead. One by one, they said a version of the same thing, that they had seen it and done nothing, because doing nothing felt easier in the moment than the cost of doing something. And the silence they had offered me, month after month, had been its own kind of wound. My mother-in-law held the ornament through all of it. She didn't set it down once. She understood then, or perhaps, she had always known somewhere beneath the grief she had never properly learned to carry, that what she had been doing for 10 months was not mourning Aaron. It was punishing me for being the one who survived him, for showing up at holidays with butter tart loaf and wrapped gifts and a 2-year-old with his eyes and his chin, a living argument against the possibility of forgetting. She had looked at Bea and felt something unbearable, and she had decided that unbearable feeling was my fault. The ornament sat on her mantelpiece that night, beside a photograph of Aaron from when he was maybe 8 years old, wearing a sweater 2 sizes too large and squinting into the sun. Aaron's brother told me this later, word by word, after everything else had already happened. I didn't know any of it yet. I was past Barry on the 400 when Bea woke up and asked for water and couldn't fall back asleep, so I pulled into a rest stop and sat in the idling car while she looked at the ceiling lights and slowly got heavy again. I thought about Aaron driving this same stretch of highway every time he visited home. I thought about how he always called me when he was 20 minutes out, how he always asked if I needed anything from the Tim Hortons on the way, How I always said no and he always brought me a medium dark roast anyway, because he already knew. I thought about how Bia would grow up without that. Without someone who already knew what she wanted before she asked for it. I didn't cry until I was back on the highway and she was asleep again. Then I cried for a long time, quietly, with both hands on the wheel and the road straight and dark in front of me. 3 days after Christmas, just before New Year's Eve, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I had just finished giving Bia her bath. She was wrapped in her towel on my lap, smelling like lavender and making the small satisfied sounds she makes when she is very clean and very warm. I was not expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw my mother-in-law standing in the hallway alone. She was carrying the tote bag I had left behind, and in her hands she held something small wrapped in the same gold ribbon I had used. I stood at the door for a moment. Then I opened it. She looked different. The composure I had always associated with her was still there, but quieter than I had ever seen it. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She held out the small package first. "I wanted to bring this back to you," she said, "so you could decide what to do with it." I took it. I already knew what it was. When I unwrapped it, the ornament was inside a clear protective sleeve, to keep it safe on the drive. The handprint looked exactly as I remembered. She set the tote bag down against the hallway wall. Then she looked at me directly, which I don't think she had genuinely done in months. "What I said on Christmas was wrong," she began. "I'm not here to explain it to you. I know what I said and I know where it came from, and neither of those things makes it acceptable." She paused. "You came to my house with food you made and gifts for everyone and something your daughter made for me with her own hands. And I told you to leave. In front of Bia. In front of my entire family." Her voice stayed level, but I could hear what it cost her. "There is no version of grief that gives you the right to do that to another person." Bia watched her from my arms with great seriousness, the way toddlers watch things they are still deciding about. I did not rush to fill the silence. "I appreciate that you came," I said when I was ready, "and I appreciate that you didn't make excuses." I shifted Bia on my hip. "But I need you to understand something. Forgiveness is something I might reach, eventually. Trust is something entirely different. I'm not offering them together. And I'm not offering them today." She nodded. She did not argue. "If you want to be in Bae's life, I'm not going to prevent that. She deserves to know her grandmother. She deserves to know all of Aaron's family." I held her gaze. "But that relationship will be built on how you treat her, not on what you feel entitled to, because she carries his name. And any visit that begins the way Christmas did ends immediately. I won't argue about it. I'll simply leave." She looked at Bia for a moment. Something moved through her face that I couldn't entirely name. "I understand," she said quietly. "Good. I meant it without hardness. We'll go slowly, when I'm comfortable, on terms that are fair to both of us." She handed me the tote bag. Inside were every gift I had brought, Bia's wrapped presents, the bottle of wine for Aaron's brother and his wife, the book I had found for the aunt. At the very bottom, a little battered from the trip, was the butter tart loaf still in its box. She turned to go, then she stopped. "He used to talk about how stubborn you were," she said. Not unkindly. More like she was reading something she had found in an old letter. "He said it like it was the thing he admired most about you." She didn't turn around. "I think I understand that now." She walked down the hallway and I closed the door. I stood there for a moment holding the ornament in one hand and Bia in the other. Bia reached out and touched the clay carefully with one finger, the way she touches things she considers important. "That's yours," I told her. "You made that." She looked at it with enormous satisfaction. "Mine," she said. The months that followed were slow and careful, the way things are when they are being built properly for the first time. My mother-in-law never asked for more than I offered. When I said a visit would be an hour, she stayed for an hour. When I said Bia was having a hard week and we needed to stay home, she said she understood and she meant it. She did not remind me of what she was owed. She did not keep score. I watched cautiously at first, and then with something closer to belief. She and Bia found each other in small pieces, a board book read together on the couch, a song Bia demanded 3 times in a row, an afternoon in March when Bia fell asleep on her grandmother's shoulder during a nature show, and my mother-in-law sat completely still for 40 minutes rather than move and wake her. I watched that from across the room, and thought about Aaron. I thought about how much he would have wanted this for his daughter. Not the easy version, the version that had been earned. The ornament stayed on the mantelpiece in Barry all year, right beside the photograph of Aaron in the too big sweater. Every time we visited, Bea would point at it from across the room and say, "Mine," with complete authority, and her grandmother would agree, every single time, without hesitation. I used to think the best outcome of that Christmas would have been not going at all. Arriving home before any of it happened, watching a movie on the couch with Bea while the snow came down outside, and nobody said anything terrible to anyone. I don't think that anymore. Because what happened that night, the part that hurt the most, was also the part that forced everything into the open. It forced the people in that room to look clearly at what they had allowed to become ordinary. It forced my mother-in-law to see what grief had been quietly turning her into, and to decide whether she wanted to stay that way. And it forced me to understand, sitting alone in a car on the 400 at 10 o'clock on Christmas night, that I had been bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to fit into a space that had never been opened wide enough to hold me. I stopped doing that, not all at once, but I stopped. Bea will grow up knowing her grandmother. She will grow up knowing she has people who love her on both sides, imperfectly and with effort, the way love always is when it has survived something real. She will know her father through photographs and stories, and the particular way certain rooms in her grandmother's house still carry the faint shape of who he was. And she will grow up knowing that the people in her life did not stay there by accident. They stayed because they chose to be better than their worst moments, and they proved it. Slowly, consistently, without fanfare, every single time they showed up. That is the only inheritance I can give her that will never run out.